Alright, well, I'm a little late to the party here. I'm reviewing the movie that came out in August, and we're almost in January, but a lot of busy stuff going around here. That's just the way our system works. And you know, a movie did very, very poorly when I have to break out a notebook to list all the things wrong with it. And this is a film, and I don't really know why I'm singling this one out. There were a lot of bad movies that came out in 2016. Batman vs. Superman was a terrible movie. The Ghostbusters reboot was terrible. The last X-Men movie, that was really, really bad. So this movie is kind of in that same vein. It's very superhero-y. And one of the problems I'm seeing just as a general trend in superhero comic book movies is they try to be way too dark and serious and full of themselves, when really the best movies in that genre have a certain amount of playfulness to it. They accept their own stupidity. And that's why the two best comic movies of the year, Deadpool and Civil War, were also the goofiest because they didn't go in there, with like this really gruff, gritty, we're trying to be a serious art sort of mentality. They know they're just popcorn movies, and instead of going out there and hitting you over the head with a bunch of symbolism and trying to be artistic, they just gave you an entertaining movie. And of course, the movie I'm talking about from August, Suicide Squad. Now, this movie really should not have sucked because the premise alone, you'd have to work very, very hard to mess it up. And I think it's one of those things where the studio kind of got involved in the post-editing and just completely scrambled up the director's original vision. So it's a very jumbled, chopped up, really hard to sort of interpret kind of movie. It feels like this is not a complete motion picture. That there is a lot of stuff tacked on to it at the end, a lot of stuff taken out of context, a lot of stuff rearranged, a lot of reshoots. So you end up not really with so much a movie with a standard plot as you do just a bunch of images clinked together for the sake of making another movie, because that's what all these kind of movies are. They're cash cows. They're an assembly line. The whole point of one existing is to introduce the next one and keep more and more and more coming. It's a perpetual financial generation machine in a way. All right. So 5 reasons why Suicide Squad sucked. First off, and this is the big problem not only with Suicide Squad, but I think with a lot of genre movies in the comic book superhero format, it has no idea what genre it wants to be. It could not decide whether or not it wanted to be a straight-up action movie. It couldn't decide whether it wanted to be a sort of a character-driven melodrama. It couldn't decide if it wanted to be a self-parody. You had all these elements of these different genres, like a hard-boiled thriller and like a crime caper, and even a little bit of a light comedy, but they never really gelled well together. So it ended up feeling very sort of schizophrenic as far as general atmosphere and ambiance. And when you have a movie jumping around the place so much like that, you can never get into a groove, and it just completely made it a chore to sit through. Okay, secondly, the characters are boring and overdeveloped. Yes, overdeveloped. Usually the problem in comic movies is the characters are underdeveloped, but in this one, there's too much pathos. You put too much backstory into it. You're trying to make them too nuanced to the point where you really can't make heads or tails what their personality is supposed to be like. And because the characters end up being so morally ambiguous, you can't relate to any of them. Because, they're too bad to be good, but too good to be bad, so you can't really form any strong opinions either way. And when you don't really have that sort of connection with the characters, you just end up not caring about any of them. And just to kind of run down the characters, I'm going to be very quick, giving my general thoughts on where they went wrong. Okay, first off, you got Deadshot. Basically, it's Will Smith playing a grumpy version of Deadpool with a daughter. Really, really sort of basic stuff. I mean, not a horrible performance, but just a very, very basic and generic one. Not very memorable. It felt like every other Will Smith character. Okay, Harley Quinn obviously supposed to be like their big marquee character, like that's going to be a breakout star and become like this pop culture phenomenon. The fact of the matter is the character is just too, crazy to be sympathetic. Like, I know you had a little fantasy sequence where she's married to the Joker and having a normal life, but the fact of the matter is she's just too out there. She's just too kooky. And generally, when you're talking about deranged characters, you really can't relate to them. That's why Michael Myers was never the main attraction of the Halloween movies. You had Dr. Loomis there, right? You have to have some voice of sanity to carry the movie through, because if not, you're just kind of stuck not being able to interpret the craziness around you. And that's why Harley really didn't work as a character. Amanda Waller, that was literally the same character on How to Get Away with a Murder. They didn't even try. That was just completely lazy. You had Rick Flag and the Enchantress playing that dual character thing. Just a terribly forced romantic subplot, which just added nothing to the movie and just detracted valuable time. Diablo, he's probably the most interesting character, the flamethrower guy with the really shady past. But he ended up getting lost in the background. When you have so many characters in a wannabe ensemble movie like this, we have to take, notice like 12 different people simultaneously. He kind of faded out in the background because you spent so much time trying to amp up Will Smith and Margot Robbie and all the others. The one character you think could perhaps be a little bit different from the other genre sort of characters just becomes faded in the background. And the rest of the characters, Croc and Katana and Boomerang and Slipknot, just one-dimensional, just a waste of characters. No reason to talk about them. All right, problem number 3. There were way too many flashback sequences. So the chronology is super disjointed, and I think that's because, once again, the film was just so heavily edited after it was wrapped up that it's just a complete, butcher job of whatever the director originally wanted to do. And there's just so many elements of the plot which just feels not like it's really there because it moves straight forward, but just there to kind of cover up continuity. That there's so many things they don't really expressly tell you that, they had to come in later and say, oh, well, by the way, here's why this person's like this. Here's their craziness, here's their backstory. And really, it just feels completely sort of needless. Like, you could have like one really good character exchange and knock out all of that. But that's just not the way this film was shot, edited, or completed. Number 4, and this is a really big problem just with superhero movies in general nowadays, just the action scenes are terrible. They're so predictable and they're so by the book. I mean, the Enchantress is just like an awful choice for a villain, and the firefights are just completely formulaic. And this movie, like every other like genre film, like high budget summer popcorn movie, had the exact same ending where you have a bunch of CGI abstract stuff flying around like in Ghostbusters and in Pixels, to where you really don't know what you're looking at. There's just so much stuff going on, and you really can't, stay grasp of, the characters. Oh, and Superman vs. Batman was probably the guiltiest party of all about doing that. It's just so dark, and everything's flashing around, everything is CGI, and nothing feels real, and you just feel disjointed. And when you're lost in so much stuff going on, you just don't care about what's happening anymore. Give us something straightforward and more relaxed. We have attention spans. We're allowed to think about things. We don't need stuff exploding every second with 45 jump cuts over the course of a minute to get us to actually be engaged with the film. And number 5, and this is once again the problem with Batman vs. Superman, it tries way too hard to be a Marvel Cinematic Universe movie. It's trying to force a team chemistry like in the Avengers, but there isn't any because you don't have 4 or 5 or 6 movies behind them like you did with the Avengers. So you already knew the characters to set up, the clash of characters, right? Like the personality crisis going on there. So in this one, you had to introduce all the characters first and then contrast, and just went way too long. And they were trying to build like a bunch of banter, and it just didn't work out. The dialogue is really forced and is awkward, and is trying to push the DC universe forward too hard. Like that's the entire point, I think, of this movie, is to introduce like certain characters so you can use them as crossovers for like the next Justice League movie. So once again, the intent of the movie is not really to be a standalone movie. It's to introduce enough characters to be a springboard to the next even bigger movie that's going to make even more money. And that's something we're seeing across the board with Marvel and DC. And it's making for a lot of really crappy movies. And just some general thoughts moving on from there. Just really, really bad. A lot of stuff to work off to make a better sequel or spinoff or whatever. But just a few suggestions. Okay, number 1, there's no team cohesion. I mean, you have like so many filler characters like Slipknot and Katana who have no personality whatsoever. They are literally their gimmicks. That's all they have. So, I mean, you need to have better characters. I mean, if you're going to move like Suicide Squad, which, is anchored around all the DCU villains, I mean, there are so many great ones you could have used instead of, Killer Croc or Boomerang. I mean, why didn't you break out, Poison Ivy or Mr. Freeze or the Scarecrow? I mean, these all would have been really, really great additions to the movie with more character pathos, with better potential for follow-up films, but they just didn't do it. So, what are the problems? Oh, way too many DCU shots, like I said earlier, trying to force it into that cinematic universe, with the Batman vs. Superman references. But strangely enough, you really didn't have a straight-up lead into the next Justice League movie, or the Wonder Woman movie, or even Lego Batman. So it kind of felt like it was an effort to kind of bridge this film to another movie, but they didn't know what movie. I mean, that's a big problem. You're just leaving the door open and trying to use it as a launching pad for another property. We don't even know the property it is. So that's another huge, huge mistake. The soundtrack I hated. Why do all the characters have theme music? It's trying to be like The Watchmen, where like every other scene is like a music video. I just hate that. Another problem, Batman's this movie quite often, but he's so boring. I mean, Ben Affleck, I'm sorry, he is the worst Batman that we've had in live action. Worse than George Clooney, worse than Val Kilmer. At least they had a little bit of pathos to them. Ben Affleck as Batman, he's just so grim and gritty and trying to not be Christian Bale that he doesn't put a performance of his own. And he's walking around the movie, he doesn't really do anything. I mean, he's chasing the Joker and beats up Harley Quinn and slaps her around a little. But beyond that, that's pretty much his only contribution to the movie. I mean, you have a character like Batman in a movie. If Batman's going to be in a movie, he should be the most interesting thing about it. But he just becomes really bland and bored. You don't get excited on screen anymore, which is a huge problem with these movies. That means you're oversaturating it. They're not special anymore. And really, probably the biggest problem moving forward the DC universe is the Joker, because I think Jared Leto is absolutely terrible as the Joker. This is far and away the worst Joker ever. This is worse than the one on the Adam West Batman show. This is worse than the one on that old Cartoon Network Batman, where the Joker was like Rastafarian. You remember that one? I mean, this is a terrible performance because he doesn't feel like the Joker. He just feels like some random, organized crime guy with green hair. And the aesthetics are terrible, and he's just not interesting at all. And if we're going to set up a series, we're going to have Batman as Ben Affleck and the Joker as Jared Leto. Oh, God, these movies are going to be atrocious. I mean, you just don't want to have these two guys going back and forth. They add nothing. They don't convey the characters well enough. They really don't even have much of a personality there, and what they do offer is very bland, very boring, and is not going to lead to anything even remotely interesting on screen. This is not Nicholson and Keaton. It's definitely not Bell and Ledger. It's not even, Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill in the cartoons. They don't have that contrast. You don't have that sharpness. You don't have that intriguing dualism. You just have Jared Leto and Ben Affleck dressed up like cartoon characters scowling at each other. Nobody wants to see that. So there you go. Just in a few moments there, my thoughts on Suicide Squad and why it sucked and why movies like this in general tend to suck. Everything that I said bad about Suicide Squad is happening in all the bad Marvel movies, all the bad DC movies, and all the bad, Image or whatever, Valiant. Still make those, the Malibu Comics, the non-big two. They're trying to build cinematic universes, and they keep making the same mistakes over and over again, and eventually we're going to get totally tired because they're so predictable and formulaic, and there's going to be a market crash. So yeah, just throwing it out there, Suicide Squad I think is a glimmer of things to come. A lot more formulaic, a lot more routine, and unfortunately, a whole lot more disappointing cinema coming out of both Marvel and DC.